Chapter 7. The cemetery was much bigger than I had remembered it. It was called Mbuduzi, meaning goat. I never found out why. It was only 12 months since we buried Robert, and the cemetery was twice as large. The rows of rows of earth heaps stretched into the distance. Beyond them was bush. The earth was black, for the grass had been burnt in a random fire that no one had tried to stop. Ash rose high in the sky whenever the wind blew and snagged in your clothes. The dry trees bowed low, seemingly resigned that soon they too would be chopped down to make way for more graves. A few of the graves were covered in concrete. Fewer had tombstones on them. The vast majority looked like sweet potato mounds of earth with sticks on top fixed to resemble a cross. I walked over to these unmarked graves looking for my brothers, a hard task as they all looked the same to me. In the distance were small clusters of people huddled around a freshly dug grave. Some were holding funerals, their sorrowful songs identifying them as Catholic, Methodist, Salvationist, Anglican, etc. I found Robert's grave at last. Weeds were growing all over it, and I pulled out what I could, though the hard, dry earth meant that I often left the roots intact. I laid my flowers on the grave, then remembered I had to break the stalks. Otherwise, they would have been they would have been stolen and resold. Grave robbers worked shifts here too. A funeral had been turned into an exercise to prevent theft. On the day of the burial, before we had lowered him down, men stepped forward to bash the coffin and scar it so it would be of no value to anyone who might be thinking of digging it up and selling it. Despite that, there was a risk his suit would be stolen. It was a hopeless battle as the cemetery had no guards. I knelt down and couldn't believe that my brother was lying under this dry mound. It wasn't so long ago that we had seen him off at the airport. He wore a black suit, white shirt, and the flowery tie that I had bought him when he got his teaching job. We all shed tears, and he promised to be back soon. After all, he only wanted to work in England until he had enough money to buy a house, and then he would return. He sent the family money and also worked hard to buy his own home. There was always something more to be done or someone else to educate, so in the end, he felt he had to stay in the UK to support the family. Then his visa expired and he couldn't return, not even for a holiday. There was a time when he would call me to say that he was on a bus returning from a night shift at one nursing home and going to a morning shift at another. It seems his whole life revolved around work. He had hoped to get into teaching, but without the right visa, it was just not possible. In any case, he didn't need English. They didn't need English teachers in England. He wrote about how stupid the people there could be. I never imagined white people could be stupid. He remembered people who had never read Shakespeare and couldn't form a proper sentence in their own native tongue, though in this respect it looked as if my own daughter might be taking the same route. We kept wondering when he would tell us that he had gotten himself a white wife and a little colored nephew for me. The last call I ever got from that godforsaken place was from a policeman telling us that he was dead. They had found my number in his mobile. He had bought his first car and was driving from work when he fell asleep behind the wheel. Budi Rabi is dead, I cried and dropped the phone. That can't be true, Baba had said, rising from his chair. Mother fainted, and the whole house was shrouded in grief. It cost £5,000 to repatriate his body. This was a sum that we could not afford, but Robert was organized to the very last. He had life insurance, and there was money to bring him home and to pay for his funeral. I was glad because I'd heard so many stories about Zimbabweans who died in the diaspora whose bodies could not be sent home. There were families who never found the closure that comes from seeing your loved one committed to the ground. However, the unity that we felt when our collective tears soaked the earth was destroyed by whatever happened afterwards. The house in Eastleigh that Robert had saved up for so long had just been purchased and the title deed signed. One thing about a people who have seen death as often as we have is the fact that everyone knows the question that will prey on people's minds even before the body grows cold. Who is going to get what? We became carnivores circling each other, but once again, Robert had thought of everything. He was only 25, but it seemed as though he knew he was running on borrowed time. He'd left a will, and a lawyer arranged by the British Embassy came round and read it to us. He was a mouse-like man with whiskers who sweated beneath his heavy winter suit. I soon formed a low opinion of him. What kind of lawyer drives a Mazda 323? Everyone else fell over themselves to try and please him, as if that would change the contents of the will he was holding before him on thick white paper. He was sitting in Baba's chair, the best in the house, though the springs must have poked his backside, or else he had hemorrhoids because he kept shifting about as if he was trying to scratch his bottom. Once we were all gathered, he began, and I was not too impressed by his English. He had a thick Shona accent where R's were L, with R's where his L's should have been. Thank you for welcoming me in the house. As you already know, your son left a weary which were given by the British Embassy. He went on to read and explain a number of legal issues before getting down to the brass tacks. The house was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. His clothes, which were to be shipped over in due course, were to be shared among all the male relatives gathered. An uncle and aunt got his TV set, which he must have never watched when he was alive. As the list of his worldly possessions was read out, I felt it was a deconstruction of what his life had been in England, sterile and functional. The part everyone was waiting for was about the house. I had overheard Takeshire and Knowledge, our two eldest brothers, discussing it in the weeks before. Takeshire, being the oldest, would take the main house, and Knowledge and his wife could live in the cottage. I give my entire interest in the property which I have purchased in full, together with any insurance on such real property, but subject to any encumbrances on said real property, to my sister Vimbai Hozo and my niece Chiwoniso Mabayo. If said devisee farius or devisees fare you to survive me, then this gift shall relapse and become part of the residue of my state. I shook my head, unable to believe what I was hearing. If I hadn't been supported, I would have swooned on the spot. Takeshire leapt up and grabbed the will from the lawyer's hands. What's the meaning of this? He tore it in half and threw it on the floor. The lawyer shrunk back in the chair, but Takeshire grabbed him by the collar and shook him so hard that his head bobbled like some sort of rag doll. Paris, Paris, the poor lawyer shouted. He was given a hard slap across the face. Let him go. It doesn't change anything, Baba said, prizing the lawyer from Takeshire's furious grip. The lawyer shot off like a bolt, shouting that he would sue. He didn't sue and remained the executor of the estate to the very end. The following months were full of wrangling. Takeshire and Knowledge threatened to beat me up if I didn't sign the house over to them. It was as though they had felt entitled to it by rights. Baba and Mother agreed that the house should go to them. What if I got married, they argued, and the family would lose the house. I would have given in if half of that inheritance didn't belong to Chiwoniso. I had to protect her birthright. Takeshire and Knowledge moved their families forcibly into the house. It was only after months of going to and fro to the courts that they were evicted by the police. I endured endless threats, which only stopped when I won a peace order barring my family from being 100 meters near me or my house.